Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was framed by Batman and hunted by the Justice League. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of controlled chaos, a familiar tune to which Izuku Midoriya's heart beat in a frantic, yet steady, rhythm. Ozone and pulverized concrete were the dominant notes, a sharp, electric scent layered over the dusty grit that coated his tongue. The city of Muzidafu was, once again, a battlefield. Uraraka, left flank! Watch for falling debris. Ida, keep the civilian perimeter secure. Don't let anyone pass the blockade. Deku's voice, amplified by years of projecting over the cacophony of battle, cut through the air. The green lightning of One for All crackled around him, a visible aura of immense power that danced across the emerald and black of his costume. He was a blur of motion, a living pinball of heroic intent. He ricocheted off the side of a half-demolished office building, using the momentum to deliver a precise Manchester smash to the jaw of a hulking villain whose skin was made of granite. The villain crumpled, his rocky exterior cracking like a dropped plate. Their opponents were a newly formed crew calling themselves the Anarchy Brigade. A group of 4 villains with synergistic quirks that made them a significant threat. Granite Skin was the brute force. A woman named Feedback could absorb kinetic energy and redirect it. A lion man called Slipstream could create pockets of low-friction air, turning solid ground into a deadly ice rink. And then there was the leader. A man in a disorienting black and purple coat, who called himself Manifold. His quirk was the true danger, spatial distortion. He could bend, fold, and tear the space around him, creating small, unstable wormholes and nauseating pockets of warped reality. Midoriya, he's targeting the bus stop! Uraraka's voice came through his earpiece. Her own quirk was in full use, her fingertips tapping overstressed support beams and chunks of falling masonry, rendering them weightless and allowing them to float harmlessly away. Deku's eyes snapped to the target. Manifold was cackling, his hands weaving complex patterns in the air. The space in front of a bus shelter, where a handful of terrified civilians were still huddled, began to shimmer like a heat haze. A vortex, no bigger than a dinner plate, was forming. It wasn't an attack meant to kill directly. It was a demonstration of power, a terror tactic. I'm on it! Deku yelled, pushing off the ground with 45% of One for All. The world became a green-tinted smear. He used FA Gene, storing kinetic energy with each preparatory step, and then released it in a burst of speed. He had to get between Manifold and the civilians. That was the only thought. Save them. Protect them. It was the mantra that had been etched into his very soul by All Might, a creed he lived and breathed. As he closed the distance, Manifold's grin widened. Too predictable, little hero! The villain didn't aim for the bus stop again. He twisted his hands, and the shimmering vortex in front of the civilians vanished. In its place, a new one, larger and far more violent, tore open directly in Deku's path. It wasn't a neat circle. It was a jagged, angry wound in the fabric of reality, spitting out flashes of color that didn't belong in their dimension. Danger Sense screamed. It wasn't just a tingle. It was a piercing, ice-cold shriek that clawed at the base of his skull, a primal warning of absolute, irreversible peril. He tried to change course, planting his iron-soled boot to pivot, but Slipstream had anticipated him. The ground beneath his foot became impossibly slick. His pivot became an uncontrolled slide, his forward momentum carrying him directly toward the gaping maw. Deku! Uraraka's shriek was raw with terror. He saw Ada, his engines flaring as he tried to sprint towards him, his arm outstretched. He saw Uraraka, her face a pale mask of horror. He saw their world, his world, framed for a split second in that tearing rift. Then, he was inside. Pain was the first sensation. A tearing, pulling agony, as if every cell in his body was being stretched in a million different directions. The crackling energy of One for All went haywire, flaring uncontrollably not as lightning, but as raw, white-hot power that threatened to atomize him. The voices of the previous wielders screamed in his mind, a chorus of confusion and alarm. The world dissolved into a blinding, silent whiteness. He felt a profound sense of disconnection, the tether to his home, his friends, his very reality, snapping like a frayed rope. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The silence was replaced by the roar of wind. The whiteness was replaced by an impossibly bright, piercing blue. He was falling. His hero-honed instincts kicked in before his conscious mind could even process the terror. He flipped his body, orienting himself to face the ground. His breath hitched. He was high. Impossibly high. The city below was a sprawling, geometric pattern of steel and glass, unlike any city he had ever seen. The buildings weren't just tall, they were monumental, arrogant spires that clawed at a sky that felt alien. The sun was a hostile white, not the familiar, gentle yellow of home. Panic tried to claw its way up his throat, but he shoved it down. Analyze. Survive. Act. He activated float. The quirk of the seventh user, Nana Shimura, took hold, arresting his terminal velocity with a gentle, invisible hand. He hung suspended in the air, a tiny green speck against the vast blue canvas. He took a ragged breath, then another. His mind was racing, trying to piece together the impossible. Manifold's quirk. It wasn't a simple portal. It must have been a dimensional breach. An unstable one. I'm somewhere else. The thought was so terrifying, so cosmically lonely, that his knees felt weak even while floating. His eyes scanned the cityscape below, and that's when he saw it. It wasn't the same kind of chaos he was used to, not the result of a villain attack. It was the chaos of mechanical failure. A massive construction crane, perched atop a skyscraper still under construction, was groaning under a terrible strain. A key support cable had snapped, and the long, heavy arm of the crane was beginning to tilt, its lattice of steel groaning in protest. It was swinging downward, a multi-ton pendulum of death, aimed directly at a street teeming with midday traffic and pedestrians. There was no time for panic. No time for confusion. There were people in danger. Deku angled his body downward and kicked off the air itself, a trail of green lightning streaking from the sky. He pushed OFA to 30%, a manageable percentage that gave him supersonic speed without shredding his limbs. The wind screamed past his ears. Below, people were pointing, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. They saw a green comet descending from the heavens. Black Whip! Tendrils of dark energy erupted from his arms, lashing out like living things. They weren't the wild, untamed whips they had once been. Now they were precise, controlled extensions of his will. Several tendrils wrapped around the thickest part of the crane's arm, anchoring themselves with a grip that could crush steel. More tendrils shot out, latching onto the solid superstructure of the skyscraper, creating a web of black energy. He wasn't strong enough to just stop it. The momentum was too great. He had to bleed it off. Like catching an egg, he thought, a distant memory of an all-might training exercise surfacing. He let the crane pull him, his body acting as the fulcrum. He stored the kinetic energy of the fall into FA gene, his muscles coiling with power. He could feel the strain, the immense weight threatening to tear his arms from their sockets. The sinews of Blackwhip groaned, stretched taut to their absolute limit. Just a little more, he grunted, his teeth clenched. He angled his descent, guiding the crane arm away from the crowded street and towards the empty construction site. Then, with a final, desperate roar, he released the stored energy. St. Louis! Smash! He didn't punch the crane. He kicked the air beneath it, releasing a massive, controlled cushion of air pressure. It wasn't a destructive blast, but a powerful, directed shove. The concussive force acted as a brake, slowing the crane's descent dramatically in its final moments. It still hit the ground with a deafening crash of tortured metal, but it was a controlled crash, landing within the confines of the site and kicking up a colossal cloud of dust and debris. The street was untouched. The people were safe. Deku hung in the air for a moment, panting, his arms trembling from the strain. The green lightning subsided, and he gently floated down to the rooftop of a nearby building, his legs shaking. The crowd below erupted, not in screams of terror, but in a wave of stunned, disbelieving cheers. He had just saved hundreds of lives. And in doing so, he had announced his arrival to the world. He didn't notice the figure hovering silently 1,000 feet above him, a crimson cape fluttering in the wind. But the figure had noticed him. Clark Kent, known to the world as Superman, had been on his way back to the Daily Planet when the alert came. Not a city alert, but a deep space anomaly notification from the watchtower. A spontaneous, high-energy rift had opened and closed in the Earth's atmosphere. Before he could investigate, he heard the groan of failing metal and saw the crane begin to fall. He was about to intervene when something else did. A green streak of lightning. He watched, his supervision analyzing the entire event in microscopic detail. He saw the boy, for he was clearly just a boy, use multiple, distinct abilities. A flight capability that wasn't based on Kryptonian biology. The manifestation of dark, tangible energy, and an explosive release of force that, while powerful, was wielded with incredible precision and control. He saw the boy's face, contorted in exertion and fierce determination. He saw the goal was not to show off, not to destroy, but only to save. Now, as the boy landed, Superman descended, slowly and non-threateningly. The crowd gasped as he came into view, their cheers for the new arrival mixing with cries of recognition for their city's protector. Deku looked up, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. His eyes widened, his jaw falling slack. Floating before him was a man who radiated an aura of power and goodness so potent, so overwhelming, it was almost suffocating. He wore a blue suit with a stylized S emblazoned on his chest, a red cape billowing behind him. He looked like All Might. Not in his features, but in his presence. He was the pillar, the symbol. That was some impressive work, the man said, his voice calm and reassuring, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority that was impossible to ignore. He landed gently on the rooftop, his feet barely making a sound. You saved a lot of people today. Who are you? Deku's mind, which had been operating on pure heroic instinct, finally caught up. The sheer, overwhelming strangeness of his situation crashed down on him. He stumbled back a step, his breath catching. I don't. Where am I? He stammered, the words tumbling out in a panicked rush. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm a hero student. We were fighting a villain, Manifold, his quirk. It tore open space and I think I'm not home anymore. He gestured vaguely, his hands shaking. This is Metropolis, right? I read about it in a comic book. Superman's calm expression was tempered with a flicker of deep concern. The boy was powerful, clearly well-trained, but also disoriented and terrified. And the energy. Superman could feel it, a subtle hum in the air around the boy, like a nuclear reactor barely held in check. It was immense, chaotic, and utterly alien. You're safe, Superman said, holding up a placating hand. My name is Superman. We can help you. The energy signature from your arrival was significant. We have facilities, people who can help figure out what happened to you, maybe even get you home. He offered a small, kind smile. Why don't you come with me? We can go to the watchtower. Deku's mind reeled. Superman? The watchtower? These were names from fiction, from stories. But the man in front of him was undeniably real. The hope that bloomed in his chest was dizzying. Help. He could get help. He wasn't alone. Yes, Deku breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Far below the sunlit streets of Metropolis, in a subterranean cavern carved from the bedrock beneath Gotham City, the world was cold, dark, and ruthlessly efficient. Here, there was no hope, only data. The Bat computer shrieked. It was not a sound Alfred Pennyworth had heard in years. It wasn't the standard alert for a breakout at Arkham, or a gang war in the Bowery. This was a Priority 1 Omega alert, a classification so high it had only been triggered twice before, once during the initial Brainiac invasion, and once when Darkseid's parademons first tore through the sky. It was the sound of an existential threat. Bruce Wayne was at the central console in an instant, his movements swift and silent. The call was off, but the intensity in his eyes was all Batman. On the main screen, a maelstrom of data was pouring in. Alfred, what am I looking at? He asked, his voice a low growl. Alfred, ever poised, stood beside him, reading from a secondary monitor. A spontaneous spatio-temporal event, Master Bruce. A wormhole of unknown origin opened and collapsed in the upper atmosphere of Metropolis. Duration, 0.7 seconds. The energy discharge, however, Bruce's fingers flew across the keyboard, bringing up simulations. It's off the charts. The screen filled with complex graphs and equations. Tachyon saturation, Z-particle decay, exotic matter signatures he'd only ever seen in theoretical models from Star Lab's most esoteric research papers. The Prometheus protocol is flagging it as a Class 9 incursion vanguard. Bruce muttered, his jaw tight. The protocol was his own creation, a threat analysis algorithm designed to identify and categorize potential world-ending threats based on energy signatures and patterns of arrival. A Class 9 was its second highest rating. The highest was for a threat already in the process of destroying the planet. It registered a single life form exiting the rift. Alfred added, his voice carefully neutral. Bioscans are inconclusive, but humanoid. Currently in Metropolis. Bruce brought up the satellite feed, rewinding it. He watched the green streak descend. He watched the impossible, multi-power rescue of the crane. He zoomed in on the boy's face. So young. He saw the conversation with Clark. He didn't see a lost child. He didn't see a hero. He saw a variable. An unknown quantity of unimaginable power that had just appeared out of nowhere. His mind, a finely honed machine of paranoia and strategic planning, began to extrapolate. Possibility 1, he's a scout. A vanguard for an invasion from a dimension of superpowered beings. This heroic act is a deception, a way to engender trust before the hammer falls. Possibility 2, he's a weapon. Sent here by an unknown enemy, a living bomb designed to destabilize the planet. Possibility 3, he's telling the truth. Bruce ran the numbers on possibility 3. A lost boy, wielding a power that made the Watchtower's deep space sensors scream. A power that, according to the computer's projections, was fundamentally unstable. He ran a simulation based on the energy fluctuations the satellite had registered. The result made his blood run cold. The simulation showed the boy's energy field losing cohesion. The resulting cascade reaction wasn't a simple explosion. It was a chain reaction that would ignite the atmosphere and, if the power source was as deep as the scans suggested, create a seismic shockwave that could crack the planet's tectonic plates. It was theoretical, but the data supported it as a non-zero probability. And for Batman, a non-zero probability of planetary extinction was an unacceptable risk. Master Bruce, Alfred said softly, seeing the grim set of his master's jaw. He appears to be just a boy. Superman is with him. He seems afraid. Fear can be faked, Bruce stated, his eyes never leaving the screen. And his intent doesn't matter if he can't control the power. He's a metabomb, Alfred, one that Clark, with his trusting nature, is about to bring onto the Watchtower. He had contingencies for this. For everything. For gods falling from the sky, for friends turning into enemies, for unregistered powers that could unravel reality. His fingers moved to a different keyboard, one locked behind multiple layers of biometric security. He brought up a new file. Protocol, Chimera. Alfred's eyes widened slightly as he read the file name. It was one of Bruce's darkest, most morally ambiguous contingency plans, designed not to defeat a threat, but to turn the world's heroes into an overwhelming, unified weapon against it, by any means necessary. Bruce, you cannot be serious, Alfred said, his voice losing its deferential tone, replaced by one of genuine alarm. This is not justice. This is a betrayal of everything you claim to stand for. Justice is a luxury we can't afford when faced with extinction, Bruce replied, his voice devoid of emotion. He was no longer Bruce Wayne. He was the Batman, making a cold, hard calculation for the survival of the human race. He would sacrifice one boy, one unknown variable, to protect 8 billion lives. He would become the villain to ensure there was a world left for heroes to protect. He initiated the protocol. The first command rerouted several $1 billion through a labyrinth of untraceable shell corporations, posthumously paying for a decommissioned and empty Star Labs research annex on the industrial outskirts of Metropolis. The second command activated a set of devices he had secretly installed there months ago. They were experimental energy siphons, designed in theory to replicate a target's energy signature. They had never been tested on a power source this potent. They began drawing ambient energy from the boy miles away, a trickle so small even Superman wouldn't notice it, and started building a charge. The third command began fabricating evidence. It doctored satellite imagery of the facility, digitally inserting the boy's blurry form near the premises moments before his official appearance over the city. It created false data logs, encrypted them, and planted them in the Star Labs mainframe, ready to be discovered. "He is a child, Bruce," Alfred pleaded, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Look at him. He is agreeing to go with Superman. He is placing his trust in us, and that's the mistake that could cost us everything," Batman said, his finger hovering over the final command. He was watching the live feed. He saw Superman's reassuring smile. He saw the boy's look of profound relief. He did not hesitate. He pressed the key. "Execute. Chimera.phase_2. The Watchtower?" Deku asked, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and hero-nerd excitement. "You mean like in orbit?" Superman chuckled. It was a warm, genuine sound. "That's the one. We'll get you checked out by our medical team, and our best minds can start working on." He trailed off. A silent, blinding flash of light erupted on the horizon. It was miles away, in the industrial sector, but it was so bright it momentarily bleached the sky white, overpowering the sun. A second later, the sound hit them, a deep, earth-shaking whump that rattled the windows of every building in Metropolis. A colossal pillar of fire and smoke, tinged with an sickly green energy that looked horrifyingly familiar to Deku, ascended into the sky, forming a mushroom cloud. The city, which had just begun to calm, erupted into fresh panic. Superman's body went rigid. His head snapped towards the explosion, his smile vanishing, replaced by a mask of grim focus. His comlink, a device so small it was built into his ear, crackled to life. "A Civ energy spike on the edge of Metropolis. Reports of an explosion at a Star Labs facility." It was the Flash, his voice a rapid-fire staccato of information. "John, can you get a read on survivors?" Wonder Woman's voice, regal and urgent. "The psychic feedback is chaotic. There's immense pain." Martian Manhunter's somber tone replied. Deku stared in horror at the column of smoke. The green energy. It looked just like One for All. But he was here. He hadn't done anything. "What was that?" he whispered, his own burgeoning hope turning to ice in his stomach. Before Superman could answer, a new voice cut through the comms. It was cold, precise, and absolute. It was a voice that carried the weight of grim certainty. "I have the evidence," Batman said. "The facility was a decommissioned research annex, but my sources show it was secretly housing a prototype stellar energy generator. The energy signature from the blast is a perfect 1:1 match for the energy fluctuations I've been tracking from the boy since his arrival." A pause, just long enough for the horrifying implication to sink in for every member of the League listening. "He used the crane as a distraction," Batman continued, his voice like chips of ice. "His appearance over the city drew all eyes, including yours, Clark. It gave him the cover he needed to overload the generator from a distance. The facility is gone. There are no survivors. He is hostile. I repeat, the target is hostile." Time seemed to slow down for Izuku Midoriya. He saw Superman turn his head, very slowly, away from the burning horizon and back towards him. The warmth that had been in the hero's eyes just moments before was gone, extinguished. It was replaced by something colder, harder. It was the look of a soldier facing his enemy, the look of a judge who had just passed sentence. The hand that Superman had offered in friendship, still hanging in the air between them, slowly, deliberately, clenched into a fist. "I don't understand," Deku said, his voice trembling as he took a step back. "I didn't do that. I was here, with you. You saw me, I saw what you wanted me to see," Superman said. His voice was no longer warm. It was a low, dangerous rumble, the sound of a gathering storm. The air around him grew heavy, charged with power. "You played your part well. But it's over." Deku's blood ran cold. The hero who looked like All Might, the man who had offered him salvation, now looked at him with the eyes of an executioner. He was alone again, in a world that was not his own, a world that had just declared him its greatest enemy, and floating before him, barring his only way out, was the strongest man on the planet. The accusation had been made. The hunt was about to begin. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavier than the collapsing crane, more destructive than the distant explosion. For a single, eternal second, Izuku Midoriya's world consisted only of the face of the man called Superman. The kindness he had seen there moments ago had evaporated like a mirage, leaving behind a chiseled, impassive mask of granite. The blue eyes, once warm and welcoming, were now chips of Arctic ice, reflecting a cold, unwavering resolve. It was the look of a man who had made a terrible, necessary decision, and would see it through to its conclusion. "No," Deku whispered, the word a fragile puff of air. His mind, a whirlwind of denial and panic, desperately searched for the right words, the magic phrase that would undo this nightmare. "You have to listen to me. It's a mistake. A misunderstanding. I was here. I was with you the entire time. How could I have done that?" Superman's expression didn't soften. "How?" he repeated, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in Deku's very bones. "You appeared from a dimensional rift that registered on our deepest sensors. You wield multiple, reality-defying powers. For someone like you, distance is probably a trivial concept." He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his red cape shifting like a curtain of blood behind him. "I don't know what your goal is. I don't know who sent you. But your first act on our world was a catastrophic act of terror. That is the only fact that matters now." Every word was a hammer blow against Deku's fracturing composure. He was being judged on evidence he knew was false, by a hero he had instantly, foolishly, admired. The ghost of All Might's smile, which he had seen mirrored in this man, now felt like a cruel mockery. "But I'm a hero!" Deku's voice cracked, rising in pitch. "My only goal is to save people. I would never do something like that. It's a frame-up. It has to be." His eyes darted around, his analytical mind grasping at straws. "The timing, it's too perfect. Someone wanted you to think it was me. The voice on your radio, the one who accused me. Batman! He did it! He must have." Superman's jaw tightened at the mention of Batman. It was the only flicker of emotion on his stoic face. To him, it was the desperate, nonsensical raving of a guilty party trying to shift blame onto the unshakable foundation of the Justice League. "Enough," Superman commanded. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. He raised his hand, not to strike, but in a gesture that clearly meant surrender. "It's over. Come quietly, you will be contained, and we will find out the truth. But I will not allow you to endanger anyone else." Containment. The words sent a jolt of pure terror through Deku. He imagined a sterile box, a prison for his power, a place where he would be trapped forever in this alien world, unable to prove his innocence, unable to ever go home. His friends, his mother, All Might, they would never know what happened to him. He would just be gone. That terror, that profound and primal fear of being lost, overrode everything else. It ignited the embers of One for All. He couldn't win. He knew that. This was Superman. In his world, a being of this magnitude was the stuff of myth, a benchmark against which all power was measured. But he couldn't surrender either. His only option was the one he was trained for when all else failed: escape. "I can't let you take me," Deku said, his voice dropping, the tremor of fear replaced by a new, hard edge of desperation. He shifted his footing, sinking into a low fighting stance. The green lightning of One for All, which had been dormant, now flared to life, crackling around his limbs in a furious, visible display of power. "I'm sorry," Superman sighed, a sound of deep, weary disappointment. "I'm sorry too, son." The fight began not with a bang, but with a whisper of movement. Superman closed the 20 feet between them in less time than it took Deku to blink. There was no sonic boom, no displaced air, just a seamless transition from there to here. One moment, the hero was a statue of judgment. The next, his hand was reaching for Deku's shoulder. Deku's danger sense shrieked a split second before the movement, a piercing alarm that gave him just enough time to react. He dropped, tucking into a roll, and Superman's hand closed on empty air. As he came up, Deku spun, channeling 20% of OFA into his leg for a sweeping kick aimed at Superman's side. It was like kicking the base of a mountain. There was no give. No grunt of pain. No reaction at all. The impact sent a painful, jarring shockwave up Deku's entire leg, rattling his teeth. Superman didn't even seem to notice. His eyes, however, tracked the movement, and his other hand shot out, impossibly fast, and grabbed Deku's ankle. "It's no use," Superman said, his grip like a vice of unyielding steel. Panic surged. Deku twisted his body in midair and threw a punch with his free arm, channeling a full 30% into a Detroit smash aimed directly at Superman's face. The air compressed in front of his fist, creating a visible ripple. The punch connected. The resulting boom was deafening, a miniature sonic boom that shattered the windows on the rooftop access door behind Superman. The force of the blow would have turned a high-end Nomu to paste, would have cored a skyscraper. It made Superman's head turn. Slightly, he turned back, his expression unchanged save for a slight narrowing of his eyes. "I said," he repeated, his voice dangerously low. "It's no use." With a flick of his wrist, he tossed Deku. It wasn't a violent, vengeful throw. It was a controlled, dismissive motion, like skipping a stone across a pond. But the strength behind it was astronomical. Deku became a green and black projectile, hurtling through the air so fast the world became a blur. He crashed through the brick facade of a neighboring building's rooftop water tower, the structure exploding in a shower of brick, splintered wood, and gushing water. He hit the solid roof deck beyond it, the impact knocking the wind from his lungs and sending a starburst of pain through his back. He was soaked, bruised, and utterly, terrifyingly outmatched. He pushed himself up, coughing, his mind racing. His durability is absolute. My attacks are meaningless. Direct confrontation is suicide. I can't fight him. I have to outthink him. He could hear the whine of approaching sirens from the streets below, the thrum of news helicopters converging on their position. The whole world was closing in. As Superman floated across the gap towards him, Deku switched tactics. He leaped into the air, activating float. Instead of engaging, he fired off a volley of Delaware Smash Air Force flicks. Not at Superman, but all around him. The compressed air bullets ripped through the air, creating a chaotic, turbulent smoke screen of disturbed air and dust from the rooftop. He used the momentary visual obscurity to activate Black Whip, launching tendrils at the surrounding buildings and pulling himself into a wild, high-speed swing through the concrete canyons of Metropolis. He wasn't just fleeing, he was thinking, his hero analysis mind working at a feverish pace. He's a flyer. Open sky is his territory. I need to get to the ground. Get into the alleys. Use the environment. He was fast. By the standards of his world, he was a bolt of lightning. He was not fast enough. A red and blue blur shot past him, moving with such velocity that it created a vacuum in its wake, tugging him off course. Superman appeared in front of him, hovering, his arms crossed. He had circled the entire block and cut him off in the time it took Deku to swing between two buildings. "This is your last chance," Superman said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Deku didn't answer. He angled his trajectory downward, letting go of Black Whip and plummeting toward the street below. As he fell, he saw it. A streak of pure scarlet lightning, zipping up the side of a skyscraper and coalescing on the rooftop next to Superman. A man in a red suit with a lightning bolt emblem stood there, vibrating with contained energy. "Clark, I'm here. What's the situation?" The Flash's voice, now clear and in person, was a buzz of hyperactivity. "Whoa. That's the kid? Energy readings are off the charts." Bruce was right. Deku's heart sank. Another one. One of the fastest beings alive. He hit the street, landing in a three-point crouch that cracked the asphalt beneath him. People screamed and scattered, running from the green glowing boy who had just fallen from the sky. Before he could even orient himself, the world became a maelstrom of red. The Flash was on him. It wasn't a single attack. It was 1,000. From Deku's perspective, it was like being caught in a hurricane made of fists. A jab to the ribs from the left, a disorienting tap on the back of his head from the right. His costume was tugged, his balance thrown off. He tried to track the movement, but there was nothing to track. Just a constant, vibrating crimson blur that seemed to be everywhere at once. His danger sense was useless. It was a continuous, agonizing scream in his skull, a sensory overload that gave him no specific information. It was like trying to pick out a single raindrop in a monsoon. He was being hit from every conceivable angle, not with knockout blows, but with a precise, debilitating flurry designed to disable him, to tie up his nervous system. Barry Allen, from his perspective, was seeing the world in slow motion. He saw the boy's muscles tense, saw the flicker of green energy, the confusion and terror in his eyes. Fast, but not fast enough, Barry thought, his mind processing 1,000,000 calculations per second. His reaction time is superhuman, but it's not on a speed force level. I can keep him off balance indefinitely. He ran circles around Deku, landing another series of rapid-fire strikes. Deku gritted his teeth, the frustration and helplessness boiling into anger. I can't react. I can't even see him. So don't react? Predict. His analytical brain, honed by years of studying heroes and villains, took over. He stopped trying to see the flash. He started seeing the pattern. The blur wasn't random. It was an orbit, a tight, controlled circle around him, with periodic vectors of attack. Like electrons around a nucleus. He couldn't stop the electron, but he could disrupt the entire atom. He needed to create an area of effect attack. Something instantaneous and unpredictable that would break the flash's rhythm. He waited, letting the flurry of blows continue, focusing all his will, all his concentration. He felt the sting of a dozen more impacts. Then, feeling the rhythm of the orbit, he made his move. He didn't aim for the blur. He aimed for the ground. Dropping his center of gravity, he slammed both fists into the asphalt, pouring every ounce of power he could muster from a 45% charge. St. Louis smash! The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The street didn't just crack, it exploded upwards. A shockwave of pure force tore through the concrete and asphalt, buckling the road in a 20-foot radius. Chunks of pavement the size of car hoods were thrown into the air like confetti. A geyser of water erupted as a main pipe shattered beneath the street. It wasn't an attack. It was an act of environmental vandalism. For the Flash, it was like the entire world suddenly tripped him. The ground beneath his feet, which he relied on for traction, ceased to be a stable surface. It became a churning, unpredictable wave of debris. He broke his rhythm instantly, his super-speed reflexes allowing him to dodge and weave through the larger chunks of flying rock, but his perfect, disabling orbit was shattered. He skidded to a halt 100 feet away, his boots smoking slightly. "Whoa!" he breathed, looking at the crater. "Okay. Big power." That single, chaotic second was the only opening Deku was going to get. He didn't waste it. He launched himself vertically out of the crater, propelled by a burst of OFA and float, but his escape was blocked again. This time, by grace and divine might, a figure descended from the sky, landing between Deku and his escape route. It was a woman of breathtaking beauty and intimidating power, clad in armor of red, blue, and gold. In one hand she carried a shield, and at her hip, a glowing, golden lasso. Wonder Woman. She had seen his raw, destructive power firsthand. But as she landed, she also saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't the crazed glare of a supervillain. It was the wide, desperate terror of a cornered animal. "Child," she said, her voice a melodic command. "This has gone on long enough. There has been enough destruction. Surrender now, and you will not be harmed." Behind her, Superman landed with a soft thud, his presence a heavy weight. The Flash zipped to his side, creating a formidable trio. He was surrounded. The trinity of the Justice League stood before him, a wall of power, speed, and wisdom. Deku's chest was heaving, his body screaming in protest. Every instinct told him to run, but there was nowhere left to go. Wonder Woman took a step forward, unfurling her lasso. The golden rope glowed with gentle, inner light. "This is the lasso of Hestia," she explained, her voice softening slightly, seeing his fear. "It compels any being bound by it to speak only the truth. There is no deceit in its presence. If you are innocent, as you claim, then this will prove it. Allow yourself to be bound." A spark of hope. A real, tangible chance. The truth. It was all he had. "Okay," Deku rasped, lowering his fist slightly. "Okay. I'll do it." He stood his ground as Wonder Woman expertly threw the lasso. The glowing rope sailed through the air and looped perfectly around his chest and arms, tightening and pinning them to his sides. The moment it made contact, he felt a warm, pervasive energy seep into him. It felt like sunlight, like a comforting presence demanding honesty. "Now," Wonder Woman said, her grip on the lasso firm. "Tell us. Did you destroy the Star Labs facility?" "No," Deku said, the word coming out with absolute, heartfelt conviction. "No, I didn't. I'm innocent." He waited for the looks of realization on their faces, for the apologies, for this nightmare to end. It didn't happen. Instead, a strange thing occurred. The lasso of truth began to glow erratically. The calm, warm light flickered, then surged with a brilliant, almost violent intensity. Wonder Woman's eyes widened in shock, her hands straining to hold on. From Deku's perspective, the lasso's energy wasn't just asking him for the truth. It was probing deeper, touching the core of One for All. And there, it found not one will, but a multitude. It found the echoes of 8 other souls, 8 other lifetimes, all fused into the core of his being. It found a power that was not of his world, a singularity of energy passed down like a sacred torch. The voices in his head, usually a quiet chorus of support, rose in a cacophony of confusion and alarm. "What is this?" he heard Nana Shimura's echo ask. "This energy, it seeks to define a single truth from a legion." The lasso was trying to comprehend the incomprehensible, to get a simple yes or no from a boy whose very soul was a paradox. This internal conflict, combined with Deku's own panicked, desperate state, caused One for All to react defensively. The green lightning around him erupted, not as a controlled extension of his will, but as a raw, instinctual flare of self-preservation. A wave of pure, untamed power pulsed outward from him. The lasso of truth, a divine artifact forged by a god, sizzled and smoked. The golden light sputtered, and the rope was violently thrown back, ripped from Wonder Woman's grasp as if it had touched a live power line of cosmic voltage. It fell to the ground, its glow dim and unsteady. Wonder Woman stared, first at her empty hand, then at Deku, with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. In millennia of wielding the lasso, nothing like this had ever happened. It had bound gods, demons, and cosmic entities. It had never failed. It hadn't registered a lie. It had registered an impossibility, an anomaly so profound it rejected the very concept of the truth it sought. What are you?" she breathed. That was the breaking point. His last hope had not just failed, it had spectacularly backfired, making him look even more alien and dangerous. The looks on their faces were no longer just judgment. Now there was confusion, and a new, deeper level of fear. He was done. Done trying to talk, done trying to reason. "I have to get out of here. Now." He didn't scream or announce his attack. He acted. All the pain, the fear, the desperation, the crushing loneliness, he channeled all of it into One for All. He bypassed his mental limiters, pushing the power surging through his arm to a level he rarely used, a level that still carried a heavy price. 80%. 90%. The air itself seemed to bend around his fist. The green lightning enveloping his arm became a solid, blinding sleeve of emerald fire. Superman and Wonder Woman saw the power build and move simultaneously, but Deku wasn't aiming at them. He wasn't aiming at the Flash. He was aiming at the crater he had already made. "Delaware smash!" He didn't flick his finger. He drove his entire fist downward in a full power punch, striking the fractured heart of the street. The result was cataclysmic. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of the world breaking. The ground shattered. The crater didn't just deepen, it became a chasm. The entire intersection collapsed inward, dragging streetlights and traffic signals with it. The ruptured water main below exploded with the force of a bomb, sending a titanic plume of water, steam, mud, and debris hundreds of feet into the air. It was a localized apocalypse, a curtain of pure chaos. The sheer force of the shockwave sent even Superman and Wonder Woman staggering back a step. The Flash easily vibrated through the tremor, but the wall of water and debris was a physical barrier that even he couldn't instantly phase through without risk. The sky went dark, blocked by a cloud of atomized asphalt and churning water. For a few precious seconds, there was total sensory deprivation, and in that chaos, Deku was gone. The moment his fist made impact, he had used the recoil to launch himself upward, into the heart of the debris cloud he had created. He was invisible. He activated float, halting his upward momentum and silencing his presence. Then, he shot out a tendril of black whip, not toward a building, but downward, into the newly formed chasm. He found purchase on the jagged edge of a broken sewer tunnel. With a single, powerful tug, he pulled himself down into the darkness. Just as the first torrents of water from the broken main began to pour in after him, he let the rushing water carry him, tumbling through the subterranean labyrinth, the sounds of the battle above fading, replaced by the roar of the flood and the echoing drip of the tunnels. On the surface, the chaos subsided. The great plume of water and debris rained back down, turning the street into a muddy, cratered swamp. The three heroes stood on the edge of the chasm, looking down into the darkness. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows, making the whole seem like a wound in the city itself. "He's gone," the Flash stated, his head tilted as he tried to listen for a super-speed heartbeat. "The rushing water, the collapsing tunnels, it's too much interference. I've lost him." Superman floated over the crater, his X-ray vision trying to pierce the earth. "The sewer system is a maze, and it's flooding. Lead pipes are blocking my vision in several key junctions. He could be anywhere." Wonder Woman walked to the edge, her eyes not on the hole, but on her lasso, which she had retrieved. It was glowing steadily again, but she could still feel the phantom shock of its rejection. She looked at her comrades, her brow furrowed with a deep, unsettling doubt. "The lasso," she said, her voice quiet and troubled. "It didn't say he was lying. It couldn't read him. I felt his terror, his desperation. It was as real as the power he wields. I do not believe he is a simple monster." Before Superman could respond, Batman's voice crackled over their calms again, as cold and sharp as ever. "His power levels during that final burst exceeded my projections by 200%. He deliberately destabilized an entire city block to create his escape. He is resourceful, exceptionally powerful, and completely unrestrained. Your doubt is a weakness he will exploit, Diana. The evidence is clear. He is a threat that must be neutralized." Superman's jaw was set like concrete. Diana's words had given him a moment's pause, but Batman's logic was brutal and, given what they had just witnessed, undeniable. The boy had the power to level their city without even trying. "Batman's right," Superman said, his voice heavy with grim finality. "We gave him a chance. He responded by tearing the city apart. The hunt is on. All of it. I'll start a grid search," Flash said immediately. "Coordinate with law enforcement. Access every traffic camera, every satellite. He can't hide forever." He gave a nod and vanished in a streak of red lightning. Superman looked at Wonder Woman. "We need to get the official story out. Warn the public. He's too dangerous for civilians to approach." He took to the air, a silent, determined sentinel rising above the city he had failed to protect from this new, unknown chaos. Wonder Woman remained for a moment longer, looking at the destruction. She had fought gods and monsters. But the feeling she got from the boy, it was different. It was the feeling of a profound tragedy unfolding. With a heavy heart, she leaped into the sky, flying towards the watchtower. The worldwide manhunt had begun. Miles away, deep in the stinking, lightless bowels of Metropolis, Izuku Midoriya finally washed up in a relatively dry service tunnel. He dragged himself out of the filthy water, his body a symphony of pain. His arm, which had delivered the final smash, was a mess of angry purple bruises and strained ligaments, the familiar price of overexertion. He was shaking, not just from the cold, but from the soul-deep terror of the past hour. He collapsed against the cold, slimy brick wall, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He was alone. A fugitive. Hunted by the very symbols of justice in this world. Through a storm grate high on the wall, he could see a sliver of the outside world. The flickering neon sign of a pawn shop. And in its window, a bank of television screens, all tuned to the news. His heart stopped. On every single screen was his face. It was a grainy shot, likely taken by a civilian's phone during the crane rescue, but it was unmistakably him. His green hair, his freckles, his determined scowl, and below his image a bold, scrolling chiron that sealed his fate. Wanted, unidentified metahuman terrorist. Armed and extremely dangerous. Do not approach. The weight of it all, the frame-up, the fight, the escape, the global condemnation, crashed down on him. A dry, ragged sob escaped his lips. Tears of pain, fear, and utter despair traced paths through the grime on his face as he stared at his own likeness, branded a villain in a world he didn't even belong to. He had fallen from the sky a hero and, in the space of an hour, had become the most wanted man on the planet. The darkness of the metropolis sewer system was a different kind of darkness than Izuku Midoriya had ever known. It was not the simple absence of light, but a thick, cloying presence. It smelled of decay and chemicals, a damp, metallic tang that coated the back of his throat and clung to the tattered remains of his hero costume. The roar of the floodwaters had subsided to a distant gurgle, leaving an oppressive silence broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of unseen water and the frantic, ragged sound of his own breathing. He remained slumped against the slimy brick wall for what felt like an eternity, his body a canvas of screaming aches. His right arm, the one he had used for the final, desperate Delaware smash, throbbed with a deep, pulsating pain. It wasn't broken. One for all's residual energy, and his own reinforced biology had prevented that. But the ligaments and tendons felt like frayed, overstretched cables on the verge of snapping. Every twitch of his fingers sent a fresh wave of agony up to his shoulder. But the physical pain was a distant echo compared to the gaping wound in his spirit. He squeezed his eyes shut, but the image was burned onto the inside of his eyelids. His own face, plastered across a dozen television screens, branded a terrorist. Extremely dangerous. The words were a venomous dart that had found its mark in the very core of his identity. He was a hero. It was not just a job title or a future aspiration. It was the fundamental truth of his existence. It was the legacy of All Might, the culmination of a quirkless boy's impossible dream, the solemn vow he had made to the spectral vestiges of One for All's previous wielders. He existed to save, to protect, to be a symbol of hope. And now, in this alien world, he was a symbol of fear. The irony was so crushingly bitter it threatened to choke him. A wave of profound, soul-shaking loneliness washed over him. He thought of Uraraka's terrified face, of Ada's desperate lunge. He thought of his mother, and the quiet, constant worry she lived with, a worry he had just amplified by a factor of infinity, by ceasing to exist in her world. He thought of All Might, his mentor, his father figure. What would he think if he could see him now? Hiding in a sewer, broken and branded a villain. Would he be disappointed? The thought was unbearable. It spurred him to move. Get up, Izuku. The voice in his head was his own, but it carried the stern, unyielding timbre of his mentor. A hero doesn't wallow. Analyze. Adapt. Survive. With a groan, he pushed himself off the wall, his muscles screaming in protest. He needed a plan. Hiding in the metropolis sewers was a temporary solution at best. Superman's X-ray vision, the Flash's speed, the combined resources of the Justice League. They would find him eventually. He was a single mouse in a house full of godlike cats. He couldn't stay here. His first priority was changing his appearance. His hero costume, Gamma, was a beacon. The distinctive green, the metal mask, the iron-soled boots, it was his wanted poster made manifest. He painfully peeled off the damaged sections of his armor, the metal plates clattering softly on the grimy floor. He kept the durable underlayer, a simple black bodysuit, but ripped the tattered green hood and cowl away. His signature red boots were too recognizable. With a heavy heart, he worked them off his feet, the metallic tang of his own blood mixing with the sewer stench. He had scrapes and bruises everywhere. He scavenged. Deeper in the tunnels, he found a maintenance nexus, a place where city workers left spare equipment. There, he found a discarded, grease-stained jacket, a dark gray hoodie, and a pair of worn-out work boots that were 2 sizes too big but would have to do. The clothes smelled faintly of oil and mildew, but they were anonymous. He pulled the hoodie up, the deep shadow concealing his distinctive green hair, and the freckles that dotted his cheeks. He looked at his faint reflection in a puddle of murky water. He was no longer Deku, the hero. He was just a ghost, a nameless shape in the urban shadows. Next was sustenance. The adrenaline of the fight had masked his body's needs, but now, a gnawing hunger and a desperate thirst made themselves known. The sewer water was poison. He followed a smaller tunnel upwards, drawn by a faint draft of fresher air, until he found a maintenance ladder leading to a manhole. Cracking the heavy iron lid just enough to peer out, he found himself in a desolate alleyway in what looked like an industrial district. It was late now, the sky a deep, starless purple bruised with the orange glow of city lights. The air was cold. He waited, his senses on high alert, listening for the telltale sonic boom of Superman or the crackle of the Flash. Nothing. For now, he was safe. He moved through the back alleys of Metropolis like a phantom, a lifetime of training for urban combat now repurposed for survival. He kept to the shadows, his movements silent and economical. He used float in tiny, controlled bursts to hop over fences or onto low rooftops, never rising high enough to be silhouetted against the sky. Danger sense, now free from the overwhelming onslaught of the Flash, had subsided to a low, constant hum, a background static of urban anxiety that occasionally spiked when a police car drove past. He found a homeless shelter with a table of leftover food set out. His pride warred with his gnawing hunger. He was a hero, not a vagrant. But what was he now? He was a fugitive who needed to survive. With his hood pulled low and his face turned away, he quickly took a stale bread roll and a bottle of water, muttering a guilty, "Thank you," to the empty air before melting back into the shadows. He ate in the darkness of another alley, the dry bread scratching his throat, the clean water the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. For 2 days this was his life. He was a ghost haunting the forgotten corners of a city that shone like a jewel. He slept in abandoned warehouses and on the rooftops of derelict buildings, always on the move, never staying in one place for more than a few hours. He learned the city's rhythms, the shift changes of police patrols, the routes of the garbage trucks, the hum of the monorail system. He saw his face on television screens in storefronts, on digital billboards, and on the front page of the Daily Planet newspaper, which he carefully lifted from a recycling bin. The story was grim. The Star Labs explosion had claimed 12 lives, scientists and security personnel working on a secret government project. He was painted as a powerful, unstable monster from another dimension, a being of pure malice who had performed a single, deceptive act of heroism to mask a devastating terrorist attack. The Justice League was leading a global manhunt, and a special government task force under Amanda Waller was also involved, offering a $10 million bounty for any information leading to his capture. He felt the weight of those 12 deaths on his soul, even though he knew he wasn't responsible. 12 lives extinguished, and he was the one blamed. It fueled a cold, hard anger in his gut, an anger directed at the true perpetrator. Batman. During the day, he found his sanctuary in the one place no one would look for a fugitive, a place of knowledge. The Metropolis Public Library. It was a grand old building, its digital archives as vast as its physical shelves. He was just another faceless kid in a hoodie, huddled over a public access terminal in a forgotten corner. For hours on end, he devoured information, his brilliant, analytical mind working at a furious pace. He wasn't just browsing. He was studying his enemy. He learned everything he could about this world's heroes. He read about Superman's origins, his powers, his unwavering moral code that, in Deku's case, had been so easily twisted. He read about Wonder Woman, the Amazonian princess and diplomat, and the mythical power of her lasso, and the reports of its inexplicable failure when used on him. He read about the Flash, the CSI who became the fastest man alive. And he read everything he could find about the Batman. The information on the Batman was different. Superman was a public figure, a celebrity. Batman was a myth, a legend, an urban ghost story parents told their children in Gotham City. Reports were contradictory. Some called him a hero, a dark protector. Others called him a violent vigilante who operated outside the law. There were no clear photos of him, only blurry shapes and shadows. But the consistent thread in all the credible reports was his mind. He was a detective, a strategist, a master tactician who was always 10 steps ahead of his opponents. He was the League's brain, the shadow that gave their bright, shining symbol its tactical edge. Deku's hero muttering, a habit he thought he'd mostly outgrown, returned with a vengeance. He sat at the terminal, his lips moving silently, weaving together threads of information. If Batman is the strategist, then he's the one who analyzes threats. He would have detected my arrival. The energy signature. He would have seen it as an unknown variable, an unacceptable risk. He pulled up the official report on the Star Labs incident. He cross-referenced the timeline with his own arrival. The explosion had occurred precisely 8 minutes after he had saved the people from the crane. 8 minutes. Just enough time for Superman to make contact, for the world's attention to be focused on the new hero in Metropolis, and for the accusation to have maximum impact. It was too neat. The evidence. Batman claimed to have it instantly. A 1:1 energy signature match. But one for all is a living power. It fluctuates. It's tied to my emotions, my physical state. It shouldn't produce a perfect, replicable signature like a machine. A perfect match isn't evidence of my guilt, it's evidence of a perfect forgery. The realization settled in his mind, not as a panic theory, but as a cold, logical certainty. He had been framed, and the only person with the paranoia, the resources, and the tactical brilliance to pull it off so flawlessly was the Batman. He had weaponized the Justice League, turning Superman's trust and the world's fear into a guided missile aimed directly at Deku. But why? The answer was as chilling as it was logical. Batman hadn't seen a lost boy, he'd seen a planetary threat on a probability chart, and he had decided to eliminate the threat before it had a chance to manifest. It wasn't an act of personal malice. It was a cold, brutal, strategic calculation. Batman had sacrificed one innocent life, Deku's, for the perceived safety of 8 billion. This new understanding shifted Deku's entire perspective. He was no longer just a victim of a terrible misunderstanding. He was a target in a premeditated intellectual war. He couldn't just prove his innocence. He had to deconstruct the lie. He had to beat Batman at his own game, and that led him to his next, terrifyingly bold conclusion. Metropolis was Superman's city. It was bright, optimistic, and saturated with heroes and surveillance. He was a shadow hiding in a city of light, and sooner or later, he would be exposed. He couldn't stay here. He needed to go somewhere the Justice League's power was less absolute. Somewhere dark, chaotic, and forgotten. A place where a ghost could disappear not because there was nowhere to hide, but because there were too many shadows to search. He needed to go to the one place in this world that seemed to be defined by the very absence of hope. He needed to go to Gotham City. It was a calculated risk, a desperate gambit. It was Batman's home turf. Walking into Gotham was like a mouse walking into the cat's den. But it was also the last place anyone would expect him to go. They would expect him to run to a remote, unpopulated area. They would not expect him to run towards the darkness, towards the heart of his accuser's territory. In Gotham, Batman was the apex predator, but the city was also filled with other hunters. It was a complex, brutal ecosystem, and Deku, with his unique abilities, could carve out a niche. He could become just another one of its strange and frightening specters, lost in the noise. The journey itself was a trial. He couldn't take a bus or a train, his face was too well known. He found the industrial shipping yards that connected Metropolis to the greater metropolitan area. He spent hours observing, watching the trucks come and go, memorizing the schedules and the security patrol routes. He targeted a long-haul truck carrying produce, its destination listed on a clipboard in the dispatch office he'd peered into from a high window. The destination was Gotham's Central Distribution Center. At a shift change, when the yard was at its most chaotic, he made his move. Using a burst of FA gene for a silent, powerful leap, he cleared the chain-link fence and landed softly behind a stack of containers. He slipped onto the back of the truck's trailer, finding a small, precarious perch on the rear axle assembly. For the next 5 hours, he clung to the undercarriage of the roaring semi-truck. The ride was a bone-jarring, deafening ordeal. The stench of diesel fumes and road grime was overwhelming. He was pelted with gravel and filthy road spray. But he held on, his resolve as hard as the steel frame he was clinging to. He knew he was entering Gotham long before he saw any signs. The very feel of the air changed. The optimistic glow of Metropolis gave way to oppressive, perpetual twilight, Even in the middle of the night, the architecture grew older, more menacing. The buildings were less like shining spires and more like stone gargoyles, hunched and brooding over the streets below. The ambient hum of danger sense intensified, the background static of anxiety rising to a low, keening wail. This city was sick. It was wounded, and its pain was a palpable thing in the air. The truck finally rumbled to a halt in a sprawling, poorly lit distribution yard on the industrial outskirts of Gotham. He waited until the driver left the cab before dropping from his perch, his legs stiff and numb. He stumbled into the shadows of a nearby alley, his body aching. He had arrived. He was in the belly of the beast. He found a high vantage point on a dilapidated tenement building, overlooking a section of the city known as the Narrows. It was a labyrinth of decaying brownstones, narrow alleys choked with trash, and streets where the light from the street lamps seemed to be devoured by the darkness rather than piercing it. The sounds were different here. In Metropolis there were sirens, but they were the sounds of heroes rushing to help. Here, the sirens were a mournful, constant dirge, the sound of a city slowly bleeding out. For the first time since the fight, he allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had done it. He had crossed the country, evaded the world's greatest heroes, and found his way to the one place he might have a chance. His satisfaction was short-lived. From his perch he saw it happen. A young couple, huddled together against the cold, walking down a side street. 3 figures detached themselves from a darkened doorway, blocking their path. The scene was sickeningly familiar, a classic, brutal mugging. One of the thugs brandished a rusty pipe. Another held a flickering knife. Deku's immediate reaction was to stay hidden. Don't get involved. You're a fugitive. Exposing yourself is suicide. It was the logical, strategic choice. But then he saw the woman's face, pale with terror. He heard the man's voice, trembling as he offered his wallet. And he saw the glint in the lead thug's eye, a cold, cruel enjoyment of their fear. He wasn't just going to take their money. He was going to hurt them. Logic and strategy evaporated, burned away by the white-hot core of his being. He was a hero. He didn't activate one for all. It was too flashy, too loud. He didn't need a sledgehammer to crack a nut. He pushed off the roof, using float to guide his descent into a silent, perfect drop. He landed behind the thugs in the alley, his worn work boots making less sound than a falling leaf. The thug with the pipe was raising it to strike the man. Should have stayed in the nice part of town, he sneered. I don't think so, a quiet voice said from behind him. The 3 thugs spun around. They saw a figure in the shadows, just a kid in a dark hoodie. The leader laughed. Get lost, kid. This ain't your business. The kid stepped forward, just enough for the faint light to catch his features. He was young, with a strange shock of dark green hair peeking from his hood. But it was his eyes that gave them pause. They glowed with a faint, internal light, an intensity that was deeply unsettling. You're right, Deku said, his voice level and cold. It's my business when you prey on people who can't fight back. The thug with the pipe had had enough. He swung the pipe in a vicious arc aimed at Deku's head. Deku didn't even seem to move. He simply raised his hand. Black Whip, not as a massive tendril but as a thin, barely visible black thread, shot from his fingertip and wrapped around the thug's wrist. Deku clenched his fist. The thug screamed as his wrist was twisted at an unnatural angle, the pipe clattering to the ground. The second thug lunged with the knife. Deku sidestepped the clumsy thrust, his movement fluid and economical. He chopped the man's arm at the elbow, a precise nerve strike he'd learned from Aizawa-sensei. The man's arm went numb, the knife falling from his nerveless fingers. A follow-up kick to the back of the knee sent him sprawling. The third thug, seeing his 2 companions disabled in as many seconds, lost his nerve and turned to run. A black tendril shot out and wrapped around his ankle, yanking him off his feet. He landed face first in a pile of garbage bags. It was over in less than 5 seconds. It was silent, efficient, and brutally effective. He hadn't used any flashy powers, just a sliver of Black Whip and his own highly trained combat skills. He hadn't seriously injured them, but they wouldn't be fighting anyone for a while. He turned to the couple, who were staring at him with a mixture of terror and awe. Are you 2 okay? He asked, his voice softening. The man nodded, speechless. The woman whispered, Thank you. Get home safe, Deku said before turning and melting back into the shadows of the alley, his heart pounding not from exertion, but from the familiar, heady rush of having done the right thing. He had just broken his own rule. He had interfered. He had revealed himself, and he had been seen. High above, perched on the stone wing of a gargoyle 2 blocks away, a figure had watched the entire encounter through a pair of high-powered binoculars. He hadn't been looking for the Metropolis meta-terrorist. He had just been on his regular patrol through the Narrows. But he had seen the kid in the hoodie drop from the sky. He had seen the silent, brutally efficient takedown. Nightwing, Dick Grayson, lowered his binoculars, a thoughtful frown on his face. He had been at the watchtower, via comms, when Batman had made the call. He had seen the evidence, heard Bruce's cold, logical assessment. He had seen the footage of the boy tearing up a Metropolis intersection. The official story was that this kid was a monster, a walking nuke with a taste for destruction. But what he had just witnessed didn't fit that narrative. He hadn't seen a monster. He had seen a fighter, yes. A ridiculously skilled and powerful one. But he had also seen restraint. The boy hadn't killed the thugs. He hadn't maimed them. He had disabled them with surgical precision. And his first words to the victims had been a question of their well-being. It was the act of a protector. The act of a hero. Something was wrong. The story didn't add up. Dick Grayson was not his mentor. Bruce saw the world in black and white threats and calculated risks. Dick saw it in shades of gray, in people and their potential for good or evil. He trusted his instincts, and his instincts were screaming that the boy in the hoodie was not the villain the world thought he was. With a flick of his wrist, he fired his grappling line, swinging off the gargoyle and into the Gotham night. He wasn't going to call Batman. Not yet. He wasn't going to call the League. He was going to follow the ghost. And he was going to find out the truth for himself. The watchtower was a place of sterile silence and quiet tension. Suspended in the void of geosynchronous orbit, it was a gleaming sword of Damocles hanging over the earth, a monument to the power and vigilance of the Justice League. In the days following the disastrous appearance of the Metropolis Meta, that vigilance had curdled into a palpable, collective anxiety. The station, usually humming with collaborative energy, was now hushed, its members moving with a grim purpose that bordered on grim exhaustion. Barry Allen, the Flash, stood in the Central Forensic Science Lab, a state-of-the-art facility that made his own lab at the CCPD look like a child's chemistry set. The air smelled of ozone and filtered oxygen. For the third time in as many days, he had the complete data packet from the Star Lab's explosion displayed across a dozen holographic screens. It was a dizzying storm of information: energy dispersal patterns, thermal imaging, material analysis, tachyon decay rates, and the damning energy signature that Batman had flagged. To any other observer, it was an open and shut case. The signature was a perfect match to the energy readings taken from the boy, Izuka Midoriya. Case closed. But Barry wasn't just any other observer. He was a forensic scientist to his core. Long before the lightning bolt had granted him impossible speed, he had lived in a world of minute details, of subtle inconsistencies that unraveled official stories. His mind was trained to see the piece that didn't fit, the thread that, when pulled, could unravel an entire tapestry of lies. And something here didn't fit. He isolated the energy signature from the bomb blast again, overlaying it with the signature taken from Midoriya during his fight with Superman. He zoomed in, magnifying the wave patterns to a microscopic level. There it was. The thing that had been nagging at the back of his mind, a dissonant note in an otherwise perfect symphony of evidence. The boy's energy signature was chaotic. It was alive. It fluctuated wildly, spiking and dipping with his movements and, Barry suspected, his emotional state. It was like a raw, untamed flame, beautiful and terrifyingly unpredictable. The signature from the explosion, however, was not. It was a perfect clinical replication. It had the same core frequency, the same wavelength, the same components. But it lacked the chaos. The wave patterns were too uniform, the energy dispersal too even, the decay rate too consistent. It wasn't the signature of a living power source losing control. It was the signature of a machine meticulously designed to mimic a living power source. It was like the difference between a real, blazing fire and a hyper-realistic hologram of one. One was raw and unpredictable. The other was a perfect, sterile loop. "It's too clean," Barry muttered to himself, his fingers flying across a holographic keyboard, running diagnostic after diagnostic. An uncontrolled power surge, especially of this magnitude, should be messy. There should be feedback loops, energy echoes, random particle jets. This is a textbook demolition. It's a bomb that was programmed to look like him. The implication was staggering. If the bomb wasn't the boy, then the boy was innocent. And if the boy was innocent, then the evidence was fabricated. And there was only one person on Earth with the technical know-how, the strategic mind, and the access to plant that kind of evidence so seamlessly within the League's own systems. Batman. Barry felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The idea was monstrous. Bruce was his friend. He was difficult, paranoid, and often infuriating, but Barry had always believed his moral compass, while skewed toward darkness, was ultimately true. Could he really frame a child, a lost, terrified child, and sentence him to be hunted by his own friends? He needed a second opinion. Not from a scientist, but from a mind reader. He phased his hand through the lab wall, his body dissolving into a blur of red lightning, and rematerialized in the quiet meditation chamber down the hall. The room was dark, the only light coming from the starfield visible through the massive viewport. In the center of the room, floating in a lotus position, was John Johns, the Martian manhunter. "John," Barry said, his voice quiet. "I need to talk to you." Off the record. John's red eyes opened, glowing softly in the dark. He descended to the floor, his form solidifying. "I have been expecting you, Barry Allen," he said, his voice a deep, sonorous hum that was both telepathic and audible. "Your mind has been a storm of doubt for days. You have finally given it a name." Barry blinked. "You've been reading my mind?" "I have not been reading it so much as hearing it scream," John corrected gently. "Your conflict is loud. You believe the child is innocent. You believe Batman is responsible for the deception." Barry ran a hand through his hair, the confirmation of his fears making them feel terrifyingly real. "It's the evidence. It's wrong. It's too perfect. A perfect crime scene is the first sign of a frame-up. Every rookie cop knows that. And you were there on comms. You said the psychic feedback was chaotic. What did you feel, John? Really feel?" John's expression grew distant, his brow furrowing as he recalled the moment of the explosion and the subsequent manhunt. "When I first reached out to sense the boy, as he spoke with Kal-El, I felt no malice, no deception. I felt a maelstrom of confusion, fear, and a profound sense of dislocation, as if a part of his very soul was still anchored to another place. It was the psychic signature of a victim, not a predator." He paused, his gaze turning towards the blue marble of the earth below. "And when the explosion occurred," he continued, "the psychic scream from the victims was one of sudden, unexpected oblivion. There was no precognitive dread, no sense of an impending battle or a metahuman showdown. It was the psychic echo of a bomb detonating without warning." Barry's heart hammered in his chest. "So you felt it too? Why didn't you say something more forceful? Why did you let Batman's narrative take over?" John's expression was tinged with a deep, ancient sadness. "Because my senses, while powerful, are not infallible against unknown biology." His mind was complex, shielded by a chorus of other psychic vestiges, ghosts within him. It was possible my reading was being skewed. Batman presented empirical data. Hard evidence. In a conflict between my feeling and his facts, logic dictated that I defer to the data. He looked at Barry, his red eyes filled with regret. "A decision I now believe was a grave error." "So what do we do?" Barry asked, his voice urgent. "We can't just accuse Bruce. He'll deny it. He's probably got 100 layers of plausible deniability built into his plan. We need more than a feeling and a forensic discrepancy. We need proof." "Proof will be difficult to acquire," John agreed. "Bruce's digital footprints are non-existent. He is a ghost in the machine he himself helped to build. To challenge him is to challenge the very foundation of the League's operational security." "So we do nothing?" Barry asked, incredulous. "We just let them hunt this kid down. Clark is out there right now, operating under the belief that this boy is a mass murderer. What happens when he finds him? He'll be trying to contain him, but with the kid's power levels, containment could easily become a eulogy. A heavy silence settled between them. They were caught in an impossible position. To openly defy Batman's directive without irrefutable proof would be seen as insubordination, potentially fracturing the Justice League at a time when they believed they were facing an Omega-level threat. But to remain silent was to be complicit in a terrible injustice, one that could very well end with the death of an innocent. "We will not do nothing," John said finally, his resolve hardening. "We will be vigilant. We will continue our own investigations quietly. And we will watch the Watcher." He met Barry's gaze. "And if Kal-El or Diana locate the boy, we must be ready to intervene. Not as his captors, but as his advocates." It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a seed of dissent planted in the heart of the world's greatest hero team. 2 members of the Justice League now secretly believed in Deku's innocence. The hunt was still on, but for the first time, the Quarry had allies he didn't even know existed. Gotham City was a symphony of decay, and Izuku Midoriya was learning its rhythms. He had spent 2 days in the city's diseased heart, a ghost haunting its crooked alleyways and rain-slicked rooftops. He had learned that the shadows here were deeper, the silences more menacing, and the cries for help more frequent and more often ignored. His heroic instincts, the very core of his being, were at war with his need for survival. Every scream he heard, every petty crime he witnessed from the safety of his perch, was a small tear in his soul. The mugging he had stopped had been a moment of catharsis, a brief, defiant roar against the crushing weight of his fugitive status. But it had been a mistake. A reckless indulgence. He had revealed a fraction of his power, and in a city like Gotham, any display of power was a drop of blood in shark-infested waters. He had to be more careful. He was holed up in the belfry of a derelict church in the Bowery, a place that had been abandoned for decades. The stone was crumbling, and the air was thick with the dust of forgotten faith and the scent of pigeon droppings. But it offered a commanding view of the surrounding streets, and it was the last place anyone would think to look for him. He was meticulously analyzing his situation, his mind a flurry of muttering and deduction. His costume was ruined, his body was bruised, and he was running on scavenged food and a growing sense of dread. His primary objective was still to prove his innocence, but to do that, he needed information. He needed access to a computer, a network, something more powerful than the public library terminals he had used in Metropolis. He needed to find the digital breadcrumbs that Batman had left behind. His thoughts were interrupted by a faint sound, a soft thump from the rooftop below the belfry. It was almost silent, a sound he would have missed if not for his heightened senses and the paranoia that was now his constant companion. He went still, melting back into the deepest shadows of the belfry, his body tensing. He peered through a crack in the stone. A figure was crouched on the edge of the roof. They were clad in a sleek, black costume highlighted with a bold blue emblem, like a bird of prey, spreading across the chest. The figure was athletic, moving with a fluid, acrobatic grace that spoke of years of intense training. It was the same person he had seen from a distance the night he'd stopped the mugging. He followed me, Deku realized, his heart sinking. Another hunter. A local one, by the looks of it. Nightwing rose from his crouch, making no move to attack. He held his hands up in a placating, non-threatening gesture. "I know you're up there," he called out, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to the usual gravelly tones of Gotham's denizens. "I'm not here to fight. I saw what you did the other night. In the alley, I just want to talk." Deku remained silent, his mind racing. Was this a trick? A new tactic? Lull him into a false sense of security before the rest of the pack descended? It was what Batman would do, but this man, he didn't feel like Batman. There was a lightness to his presence, an absence of the crushing, oppressive weight of paranoia that Deku imagined Batman carried everywhere. "The whole world is looking for you," Nightwing continued, taking a slow step towards the belfry. "They say you're a monster. A terrorist. But I've been a vigilante in this city for a long time. I know what monsters look like. They don't stop to ask if their victims are okay." That single sentence cut through Deku's fear. This man had seen the whole encounter. He had seen the restraint, the concern, He wasn't just spouting a line, he was referencing a specific detail, a detail that contradicted the official story. Slowly, cautiously, Deku stepped out of the shadows and onto the belfry landing. He kept his distance, his body coiled like a spring, ready to bolt. The green lightning of One for All flickered nervously around his fists. "Who are you?" Deku asked, his voice raspy. "My name is Nightwing," the man replied. He took another step closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "I work in Gotham. I know Batman. I know the League. And I know that sometimes, they get things wrong." Deku's eyes narrowed. "You know Batman?" So he was one of them. A part of the system that had condemned him. "I know him better than anyone," Nightwing said, and there was a complex layer of history and emotion in his voice. "Which is why I also know he's not infallible. He operates on data and probabilities. He sees a 1% chance of a global catastrophe and treats it as a 100% certainty. He'll burn down a village to kill a single snake." The analogy was so apt, so perfectly aligned with Deku's own conclusions, that it startled him. "He framed me," Deku said, the words spilling out, raw and accusatory. Nightwing stopped, his head tilted. "You believe that? You're certain?" "I'm a hero," Deku said, and the words were a declaration, a reclaiming of his stolen identity. "Or I'm training to be one. In my world. We were fighting a villain whose power could warp space. He sent me here. The first thing I did was save people. The only thing I wanted to do was help. Then an explosion happens miles away, and suddenly your Batman is on the radio with perfect evidence against me. Evidence that appeared in minutes. It was a trap. And your Superman walked me right into it." The bitterness and anger in his voice were palpable. Nightwing listened, his expression unreadable behind his domino mask. He heard the boy's story, the talk of another world, of quirks, of a life of heroism. It was a fantastic, unbelievable tale. But as he looked at the boy, the fierce, desperate conviction in his glowing green eyes, the way he held himself, like a soldier fighting a war on his own, he found himself believing it. It made more sense than the alternative, that this determined, heroic kid was a secret mass murderer. Dick Grayson had been raised by Bruce Wayne. He had been trained to be Robin, to be a soldier in Batman's war on crime. But he had never fully subscribed to Bruce's crushing pessimism. He had left the shadow of the Bat to become his own man, to forge his own identity in the corrupt city of Bloodhaven, and now, back in Gotham, he was defined by his empathy, his belief in second chances, his trust in people. It was his greatest strength, and, as Bruce had often warned him, his greatest weakness. Right now, looking at this lost, powerful, and fiercely noble kid, Dick decided to embrace that weakness. He made a choice. "I believe you," Nightwing said. The two words struck Deku with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his defensive stance faltering. For days he had been utterly, cosmically alone, a pariah hunted by gods. He had been so wrapped up in his own desperate struggle that the idea of an ally, of someone simply believing him, was a concept he had forgotten was possible. A profound, aching relief washed over him, so intense it almost brought him to his knees. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and unexpected. He fought them back, furious at his own emotional display. "Why?" he choked out. "Why would you believe me?" "Because my gut tells me to," Nightwing said with a small, wry smile. "And because what I saw in that alley doesn't match what the Justice League is selling. And mostly, because if you were the monster they say you are, you would have leveled half this city by now just trying to get away. But you haven't. You're hiding. You're surviving. You're acting like a fugitive, not a conqueror." He took the final few steps, closing the distance between them. He stopped a few feet away, extending a hand. "You can't do this alone. You need a safe place to think. You need food that isn't stolen. And you need access to a network that can't be traced. I can give you that. But you have to trust me." Deku looked at the outstretched hand. It was a lifeline. It was also, potentially, the final closing of the trap. His mind screamed at him to be cautious, that this was too easy, that it had to be a trick. But his heart, the hero's heart that had gotten him into this mess, told him something different. It told him that this man, Nightwing, was genuine. His own danger sense, which had been humming with a constant, low-level dread, was strangely silent in this man's presence. With a trembling hand, he reached out and grasped Nightwing's. The grip was firm, reassuring. "Okay," Deku whispered. "I trust you." For the first time since he had been ripped from his reality, Izuku Midoriya was no longer alone. Nightwing's safe house was a place of stark contrasts. It was located in a renovated clock tower in the heart of the newly gentrified Bristol district, a small island of gleaming modernity in Gotham's sea of gothic decay. Outside, the city was dark and menacing. But inside, the apartment was warm, modern, and filled with a surprising amount of light. One entire wall was a massive window offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the city's twisted skyline. Deku stepped inside, feeling deeply out of place. He was covered in grime, his clothes were little more than rags, and he was tracking sewer-scented filth onto a pristine hardwood floor. "Showers through there," Nightwing said, gesturing with his thumb as he pulled off his own mask. The face beneath was young, younger than Deku had expected. He had sharp, handsome features, kind blue eyes, and black hair that fell across his forehead. He looked less like a hardened Gotham vigilante, and more like the charismatic lead of a boy band. He offered Deku a genuine, easygoing smile. "I'm Dick Grayson, by the way," he said. "There's a first aid kit in the bathroom cabinet. You look like you need it. I'll find you some clean clothes." Deku just nodded, overwhelmed. He stood under the hot spray of the shower for a long time, letting the water wash away the dirt, the stench, and some of the deep, clinging chill of the past few days. He meticulously cleaned and bandaged his cuts and bruises, hissing as the antiseptic stung his raw skin. His body was a roadmap of his ordeal, a tapestry of purple and yellowing bruises. When he emerged, wrapped in a towel, he found a set of clean clothes laid out on the bed, a plain black t-shirt, gray sweatpants, and a new hoodie. They were a little long, but comfortable. He also found a tray with a steaming bowl of soup, a sandwich, and a tall glass of water. He devoured the food, the simple meal tasting like the most exquisite feast he had ever had. The simple acts of showering and eating a real meal felt like profound luxuries. He found Dick in the main living area, sitting in front of a massive, curved computer monitor. The screen was filled with code, satellite maps, and encrypted data streams. "Feeling more human?" Dick asked without turning around. "Yes," Deku said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for all of this." "Don't thank me yet," Dick said, his tone growing more serious. "You're safe for now, but this is Bruce's city. He has eyes and ears everywhere. We're on borrowed time." He swiveled in his chair to face Deku. "You said you need to deconstruct the lie? To do that, we need proof. Hard, irrefutable proof that will make Superman and the others listen. So, tell me everything. From the beginning. And don't leave out a single detail." And so, Deku did. He told Dick about his world, about quirks, about UA High School. He described One for All, its sacred history, its immense power, and the vestiges of the past users who resided within him. He described the fight with Manifold, the feeling of being torn from reality, and his arrival in Metropolis. He recounted his conversation with Superman, the hope he had felt, and the crushing betrayal that had followed. And he laid out his analysis, his theory about how and why Batman had framed him. Dick listened intently, his expression growing more and more grim. He pulled up news articles, satellite images, and restricted Justice League mission reports that he still had clearance for. He cross-referenced Deku's timeline with the official reports. "You're right," Dick said, pointing at a complex energy graph on the screen. "This is the data Barry, the Flash, has been looking at. He's a CSI. He's been having doubts. He thinks the bomb signature is a fabrication. Too clean." He paused. "And John, Martian Manhunter, he told Barry that your psychic presence felt like a victim, not a killer." Deku felt a fresh wave of hope. "So others in the League suspect?" "They suspect," Dick confirmed. "But they have no proof. And they're afraid to challenge Bruce directly without it. He built the system. He knows how to hide within it." He looked at Deku, a new level of respect in his eyes. "You have an incredible mind, you know that? Your analysis of Bruce's motives, his methods, you figured him out in 2 days while hiding in a sewer. It took me years. A new alert pinged on the screen, drawing both their attentions. It was a silent alarm, triggered from a different system. A small window popped up, displaying a simple, text-based chat interface. The name on the screen was one Deku didn't recognize, but Dick Grayson went still. Oracle, you have an unregistered meta in your apartment, Dick. Care to explain why the world's most wanted fugitive is using your Wi-Fi? Dick let out a long, slow breath. This complicates things, he muttered. He typed a quick reply. Nightwing, it's not what you think, Babs. He's innocent. Oracle, that's not what the evidence says. Nightwing, the evidence is a lie. Bruce's lie. I needed to talk to him. Hear his side of it. There was a long pause. Deku watched the screen, his heart pounding. Who was Oracle? Another one of Batman's soldiers? Oracle, you always did lead with your heart, Dick. Send me everything you have. Your analysis. His story. All of it. I'll look into it myself. But know this, if you're wrong, you're not just harboring a fugitive. You're committing treason against the League. And if Bruce finds out you've involved me. The sentence was left unfinished, but the threat was clear. Nightwing, I know. Send me a secure upload link. Dick turned to Deku. Oracle is a friend. The best investigator I know. Better than me. Maybe even better than Bruce in some ways. She's the most powerful information broker on the planet. If there's a digital breadcrumb to find, she'll find it. He gave Deku a reassuring look. And she's another person who values truth over protocol. This is good. She's our best shot at finding the proof we need. With Oracle now on their side, a fragile, clandestine network of allies was beginning to form around the hunted boy. There was a glimmer of a chance. But in the darkness of Gotham, secrets never stayed secret for long. And the Bat had more than one family. The Clock Tower safe house became a sanctuary suspended between hope and dread. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the first time in what felt like a lifetime that he could breathe without the constant, gnawing fear of being discovered. The simple luxuries of a soft bed, regular food, and the absence of the sewer stench were a balm to his frayed nerves. But the tranquility was a thin veneer over a pit of anxiety. He was a prisoner in a gilded cage, his freedom entirely dependent on the trust of a man he had just met. Dick Grayson had given him a purpose. No longer was he just surviving, he was fighting back. The massive, curved monitor in the living room became their war table. Deku, with his sharp, analytical mind, and Dick, with his intimate knowledge of Gotham's dark underbelly and the League's protocols, formed a surprisingly effective two-man investigation team. They worked for hours that stretched into a day, then two. Dick taught Deku the basics of encryption, how to navigate the dark web, and how to think like a Gotham detective, assuming everyone was lying until proven otherwise. In turn, Deku impressed Dick with his preternatural ability to process information, to see patterns and connections that weren't immediately obvious. His hero muttering, once a source of mild embarrassment, became a key part of their process, an audible stream of consciousness that often led to breakthroughs. The shell corporation that bought the Star Labs annex. It's a ghost, Deku murmured, his eyes scanning lines of code and financial records that Oracle had provided. The data flowed across the screen, a river of numbers and names. Registered in a non-extradition country, funded through a dozen blind trusts, liquidated the day after the explosion. It's a perfect dead end. Classic Bruce, Dick said, sipping a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He was leaning back in his chair, observing Deku's process. He builds his cover stories like fortresses. Each wall is designed to lead you to another, stronger wall, until you're so exhausted you just give up. But he had to procure the physical materials for the bomb, Deku countered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. The energy siphon technology, the explosives, that had to come from somewhere. It wouldn't just be Wayne Enterprises tech. That's too direct, too easy to trace back to him. He'd use a third party. A cutout. He began cross-referencing shipping manifests from restricted military contractors and advanced technology firms, a list Oracle had acquired for them. It was like searching for a single grain of sand on a digital beach. While they worked, they talked. The investigation became interspersed with moments of quiet connection. Dick, seeing the tension coiled in the boy's shoulders, would gently change the subject, asking about his world, his friends. Deku, hesitant at first, slowly began to open up. He spoke of Uraraka's bright optimism, of Ida's unwavering righteousness, of Bakugo's explosive rivalry that, beneath the anger, was forged in a shared, unbreakable history. He spoke of All Might, and the immense pressure of inheriting a legacy as bright as a star. As he spoke, Dick saw not a metahuman threat, but a homesick teenager buckling under the weight of two worlds. Your friend, Bakugo, Dick said thoughtfully after Deku described a particularly explosive training exercise. He sounds a lot like a guy I grew up with. Jason. A shadow passed over Dick's features, a flicker of old pain. All fire and fury, always pushing, always needing to be the best. Drove me crazy. But I knew if it came down to it, he'd have my back, no matter what. The comparison, the simple act of relating his world to theirs, made Deku feel a little less alien. Did you ever have to fight him? Deku asked quietly. Dick let out a short, humorless laugh. Fight him? We practically had to be surgically separated some days. But we were family. You fight with family. Sometimes, that's how you know you are family. This fragile, burgeoning trust was what kept Deku sane. But outside the clock tower's insulated walls, the hunt continued, relentless and suffocating. News reports still flashed his face, the bounty on his head a constant, grim reminder of his status. He would watch the city from the panoramic window, a silent, sprawling beast, and feel a pang of an emotion he couldn't quite name, not just fear, but a strange sense of responsibility for this dark, wounded place. The first sign that their sanctuary was not as secure as they hoped came not from a frontal assault, but from a subtle shift in the city's atmosphere. Patrols have been rerouted, Dick noted, his eyes narrowed as he looked at a tactical map of Gotham. GCPD and even some of the League's assets are being pulled away from the Narrows and the Bowery. They're concentrating on the financial district and the ports. A distraction? Deku asked. No, Dick said, a frown creasing his forehead. It's the opposite. It's a strategic void. He's pulling his pieces off the board in certain areas, creating a vacuum. He's trying to bait you, to make you think it's safe to move, to flush you out of whatever hole he thinks you're in. He looked at Deku. He doesn't know you're here with me. Not yet, but he knows you're in his city. And he's starting to play his game. The psychological pressure was immense. Deku felt like a mouse in a maze, aware that the architect was watching his every potential move, changing the walls around him. He owed Dick everything, but his presence was also putting Dick in incredible danger. The guilt gnawed at him. Maybe I should leave, Deku said one evening, looking out at the glittering, deceptive lights of Gotham. I'm putting you at risk. If Batman finds me here, he's not going to find you, Dick interrupted, his voice firm. He walked over to stand beside Deku, following his gaze. And you're not leaving. We're a team. We see this through together. Besides, he added, a wry grin touching his lips, it's been a while since I've given Bruce a real headache. I'm kind of enjoying it. The easy confidence was reassuring, but it did little to quell Deku's anxiety. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, a constant prickle at the back of his neck that even his danger sense couldn't isolate. The confrontation, when it came, was not what he expected. It was late. A storm had rolled in over Gotham, shrouding the city in a torrential downpour. Rain lashed against the massive clock face of the tower, each drop a tiny fist beating against the glass. The only light in the room came from the glow of the monitor, and the occasional, brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated the city in stark, monochrome detail. Deku was asleep on the couch, exhausted from their work. Dick was at the console, running a decryption program Oracle had sent them. It was a brute force algorithm, slow and painstaking, trying to crack the last layers of encryption on a data fragment they'd salvaged from the Star Labs server. A sudden, jarring thud echoed from the roof access door on the upper level of the apartment. It wasn't loud, but in the relative quiet of the storm, it was as clear as a gunshot. Dick was on his feet in an instant, his body tense. Deku jolted awake, his heart hammering in his chest, the green lightning of One for All already starting to crackle around him. Stay here, Dick hissed, grabbing his eskrima sticks from a nearby charging station. And stay quiet. He moved towards the spiral staircase that led to the upper level, his movements as silent as a cat's. Deku ignored the order. He couldn't just sit here while Dick faced an unknown threat alone. He rose, sinking into a low combat stance, his eyes fixed on the top of the stairs. Another sound. The soft click of a lock being disengaged from the outside. Dick froze on the stairs, his eyes wide. That door had a triple-reinforced, magnetically sealed lock that only he could open. No one should have been able to bypass it. No one except